I lived in a cheap hotel for a couple of years, then I moved to an apartment. And then I moved to a cheaper apartment, and my roommate was a guy named Charles Stevens. Actually, what happened was this landlord let us live in this abandoned building if we fix it up. And we did. We, replastered the walls and stuff. Or at least I replastered my half. We wallpapered the hallway with road maps, and in the kitchen we had I painted a mural of like teen children starving. In the bathroom we painted a mural of people pointing at the toilet seat and laughing. But this guy, my roommate, was a guy named Charles Stevens, who taught me many things. One would be how to hide in manholes when people are facing you. And his daughter is Chaka Kahn.
I see.
But at this time, she was like 10. And Del Close lived in this apartment before us. It was like almost a condemned building. You couldn't go in the door. The way you get up into the apartment was you'd have to climb you have to climb onto the roof and go in through a door on the roof. And this is the time when the Skip Williamson adventure occurred. Skip was living in Missouri, and he got a job as publicity director for a play that was produced by Mae West called Daddy Was a Lady, starring the famous transvestite Ray Bourbon. And they went to Cripple Creek, Colorado to do their first production of this play. And I had been informed that in the process, I don't know, it was like a lot of crime, and Cripple Creek was a wide open miners town, and you'd have to get the complete story from Skip. Someday he'll probably write this all down in a clear fashion. But we'd been informed, I think the FBI had informed Skip's parents that he was dead. He had been killed because they found a body in the river of a guy with a beard. So we thought that Skip was dead. And then all of a sudden, one day he showed up in Chicago and stayed at my apartment where you'd have to climb the ladder to get to the roof. And you had a gas heater, you had a water heater, where before you wanted hot water, you'd have to turn it on, and after you got hot water, you'd have to turn it off. If you forgot to turn it off, it would explode. So Skip came, and then we called his parents, and his parents came, and they had to climb up the ladder to get in. And this was fun, I guess. It was free anyway. At the end, the evil landlord tried to charge us, even though that wasn't part of the deal. But the building would get condemned every few weeks anyway. It's not there anymore. Well, who was in my class? Well, Jim Sturgay was in my comic class. Well, I used to teach at the Art Institute.
Oh, really?
He was a student. Carol was in the Discovery Center class. I don't know. A lot of people that did stuff for the underground comics were young at the time. Like Dan Klein was like 16, or Jay Kinney was 16. But I don't know. Do you?
And then there's I mean, every time I've been here...
It's like I should say something like Jimmy Andrew. Or, like...
well, like, every time I've been here, there's always someone calling you, or you have to get back to someone on helping them, like,
yeah, well, this chick should meet you because, well, this is Steven. And I told her to go to Stevens, and plus she has a magazine, and eventually we will all unite.
And also, like, infamous Chick Tracks, didn't you?
Oh, Jack T. Chick.
Yeah, didn't you recommend him some Filipino artists or something like that?
Oh, no, that was Vince Fago. Although Jack Chick uses this method. Vince Fago was an old cartoonist who did the Calico Pup in the 1940s. He did Happy Jack in Dandy Comics. And when I was a little kid, he was one of my favorite cartoonists. So when I became an adult cartoonist, one of the first, he created the Calico Pup, which I've used in Bijou as a character too. So I decided to look him up, and I think he's still alive. He was in his 70s and 60s, and he was into Buddhism. He was doing Buddhist cartoons. He has a bunch of little Buddhist books out. And he called up one day and said that Marvel had hired him to package these classic comic books where they'd adapt, like Robinson Crusoe, and my favorite one is Commit a Crime in the World of Mae West. What's that? Crime and Punishment. They'd broken down Crime and Punishment into like 24 pages. It's great. But they wanted to do this thing, and they gave him a budget, and he didn't know what to do. So because the economy of the Philippines was such that artists in the Philippines would be getting paid $5 a page, but when Americans were getting $50, but in the Philippines, $5 had the buying power of $50. And I told Fago about the Philippines, and I referred him to the Pablo S. Gomez line of comic books. And I thought he would just call Gomez and have Gomez sub-agent it for him. Maybe pay $15 a page instead of $5, and Gomez would make $10. But instead, he actually went to the Philippines, and he hired all these guys for $15 a page when they were getting $5. And I have an old Philippine comic fan magazine where the people in the Philippines, after Fago's arrival, compare him to St. Joseph. They were just, they were getting paid 3 times as much, so a lot of them bought houses and hired butlers. And then some of them moved to New York. They thought, I'm working for the Marvel Comics and I'm very wealthy. Now I will move to New York. And they moved to New York. $15 a page was not a good rate when they got to New York. So some of them actually are now in America working in comics. Nestor Redondo and Alfred Alcala. And they in turn have inspired the generation of Jim Lees. And perhaps this would not have happened had Vince Fago not edited these Classics Illustrated things. It's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life. There would be no direct sales. There would be no Jim Lee.
Well, also, you work for a Bazooka Joe. So Jay, you worked on Bazooka Joe.
Yes.
Thank you.
Once every 5 or 6 years, the Bazooka Joe was rewritten to make it modern. So the last one was done in 1980, and I wrote a bunch of those, and Howard Cruz drew it, and Art Spiegelman wrote some, and J.D. King wrote some, and John Holstrom wrote some. In about 3 or 4 years ago, they wanted to do a new one, and a marketing company got involved, and we did this new Bazooka Joe, where he's like a teenager still. He was a child, and then we made him a teenager in 1980. And now he's a handsome, consumerist teenager. And there's a lot of newspaper articles condemning what we've done to Bazooka Joe, but it's just as lame as it always was. This time usually it would take us a couple months. We'd do 50 Bazooka Joes, that would be it. This time there was a marketing company involved. They did focus group testing. Kids said that they thought Bazooka Joe looked like a dork, so we had to make him look more like Michael J. Fox or something. And it took a year. And out of 400 or 800 jokes, they picked 50.
So do you think some of your best work is in those 50 jokes?
Well, in fact, I would be, I guess, the most widely read author in the world. Some guy called from a paper in Texas and told me that. Bazooka Joe is printed in all languages. It's the most widely read thing in the world, according to some book about bubblegum that came out a while ago, and according to this fellow in Texas who called. So
That's
I would be
pretty
the most
impressive.
widely read author in the world. But we don't want to talk about it because of the Beatles. What happened to the Beatles? Well, I don't want the, Southern. I don't want anybody to do bonfires of Bazooka Joe because it would be more widely read than. Well, we did wacky.
So do you say
things.
you're more popular than Jesus, Jay?
I don't say that. No. I avoid this. I refer people to the marketing company. Actually, I edited it, but it wound up that Carol Sobushinsky wrote the most jokes that were accepted.
I thought you were talking about the Bible. You edited it.
Oh, no. Then in 1970-something, in the early 70s, we did the series Wacky Packs. Art Spiegelman, who did fanzines with us, he did, we all worked for Wild, and then Art started his own fanzine called Blase when he was like 14 years old. I met him when he was 14. He came to Miami where I was living with his parents on vacation. I met Art when he was 14. And he was doing Blase magazine. By the time Art was 16, he was hired by Topps Chewing Gum to develop new products, which was a great idea, to hire a kid to develop products that were for kids. And he was with Topps for 30 years or something, right? This is the guy who did Mouse and the editor of Raw, Art Spiegelman. Art and Woody Gelman and Len Brown at Topps had devised a product called Funny Billboards. And they were billboards, and you'd pop out the product from the billboard. So it was like Pupsy Cola, the soft drink for dogs. I guess the first one was Poopsie Cola, for the soft drink for babies. Or Blunder Bread instead of Wonder Bread. And so Funny Billboards was out there, and it came and it went. And then a couple years later, they decided to just take the products from the Funny Billboards and do a series of that. And that was the first series of Wacky Facts. At that time, it became the biggest bubblegum series in history in 1974. And you can still go to resale shops and see old refrigerators with these Wacky Facts stuck on them.
Yeah, I think every person I know still has them stuck to some piece of furniture in their household, or toys. And
but just lately, people are starting to. There's a magazine called Non-Sports Update, and there's starting to be a press for collectors of non-sports. Like there are a lot of baseball card magazines on the stands, but now there seems to be a dearth, a influx of baseball product. And there's just so much out there that people aren't collecting it like they used to. Because before, you'd only have to buy the cards that were made by 3 companies. Now there's like 50 companies, and it would cost you $60,000 a year to buy everything at retail, to have everything. So it's no longer finite, and people are starting to collect non-sports cards, which are the novelty type cards like Wacky Facts. It's a category, non-sports, it's like a category that's defined by what it is not. You know, it's like that joke where a guy writes a book and brings it to the publisher and he has it done, but he doesn't know what the title will be. So the publisher says, does it have drums in it? And he says, no. So the publisher says, we'll call it Without Drums. So that's like non-sports. But anyway, within the last 4 years, Non-Sports Update magazine came out, and I did the covers for the first 6 issues of that. And now they have the cooperation of all of the trading card companies, and Non-Sports Update has become the Bible of the collecting profession. And they have a lot of articles about Wacky Facts. It seems like that's the thing that most non-sports people collect. It's the Honus Wagner of non-sports. Bill Griffith wrote Wacky Facts. Kim Deitch.
Who drew them?
Most of the ones during the golden age of Wacky Facts were painted by Norm Saunders. There was another guy named Joe, who was an Italian last name, I forget his last name, who painted some of them. He's like an old, funny animal cartoonist in the 40s who worked at Topps painting things, painting Wacky Facts. Once I asked him, what funny animal books did you do in the 40s? He says, I don't know. We did those because we could get, $10 a page. I don't know. Joe the dog, Bill the duck. I don't know. I like this kind of attitude. Once at the Bubblegum Company years ago, the art director, Ben Solomon, was a man who would, wear a visor and smoke a cigar and supervise rows of people doing pay stuff. Once that they were doing Easter bunnies or something. And once I actually heard him say to somebody, one of the artists, work faster, make that bunny cuter. But I like this. I like direct art direction. If they say do it over, I like them to say do it over. I don't like this business where the art director has to be too tasteful to soothe the ego of the artist. It just wastes time.
So, were you ever involved in punk rock shit?
No, I got some. I bought the early records. Are you familiar
Such
with
as
White Boy and Jake Whipp?
No.
White boy, Jake, Whipp and Mr. Ott.
No.
Wait, I'll go get this. This is quite interesting. 75. Jake Whipp and Mr. Ott. It's like it's like a father and son team, but they're not. You know, it's just this one guy in the band decides to use the name Mr. Ott. So it's like this young punk boy and Mr. Ott who wears a business suit.
Wiggly squat. Does it come with any interesting packaging stuff?
Well, it might have the words to "I could puke." And my record player doesn't work. There was a guy. There's a guy named Willie Loco who's pretty good too. Do you know Daniel Johnson's work?
Sounds familiar. Johnson. Oh, wait. The speaking motorcycle guy?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna make a chart.
I don't know, it seems like the best stuff never. Like, you know, we know about the mother's invention, we know about Frank Zappa. But when you turn on the TV, you won't get a ad for the best of the Fugs. But the Fugs were the primary band of the 60s. Not the Beatles. But revisionist history would have us believe that it was like the Beatles and James Taylor. And in fact, we consider that stuff conspiracy music. Right. I guess I didn't save much of this, or at least did I save this?
Was that Castro magazine thing?
Oh yeah.
Wait.
In real early in 1960 or 61 or 62, I was in Miami, and one of the things that I did when I was a youth was I did cartoons for a Cuban exile newspaper called Zig-zag Libre that was founded by Antonio Perhias, who later did Spy vs. Spy for Mad. So I was showing you like one of these old cartoons. Mm-hmm. And now, 30 years later, I see the Oliver Stone movie.
Which Oliver
The Kennedy thing, and it talks about how the CIA was involved in many of these early anti-Castro organizations, if not all. And it causes me to wonder. But Zig-zag Libre is still in business. It's now called Zig-zag, and it's a humor magazine. It's not so much political anymore. All these Cuban exiles who came off boats with just the shirts on their back are now civic leaders in Miami and have been successful over the past 30 years.
So was that magazine CIA funded or supported, or into your knowledge? Or?
We do not know. They're still around.
I see. Now, what was...
And probably the editors wouldn't know either.
Weren't you investigated by the CIA or something, or FBI or something of that sort?
Everybody in the 60s who did anything in the mass media, there would be an FBI file on it, or CIA, or Army Intelligence, or the Chicago Police. So I got all my files under the Freedom of Information Act.
And what did they say?
They concluded that I wasn't dangerous, that I was, they said he works for the Sun-Times, he works for the Chicago Seed. The Seed was like a radical newspaper. And I said, he likes the Sun-Times. I guess this is from interviewing my neighbors. I said, he likes the Sun-Times better than the Seed because they pay better. But, you know, the Seed was not good. I mean, I didn't, there was heavier censorship in the Seed than there was in the Sun-Times. It was people with agendas, political agendas, appreciating political correctness, that when the Seed started it was pleasant, but later the Seed was not a bastion of free press at all. I remember once Abbie Hoffman also had an agenda, and he asked a bunch of people to do illustrations for his book. So he asked me to draw a picture of a typical hippie commune, and I did. I drew a bunch of hippies neglecting their children who were running around naked about to fall out the window, playing Hair on their record player, overdosing. And he wouldn't print that. He didn't want that. He wanted to do something. When he said a typical hippie commune, I guess he expected me to put the media fantasy of hippiedom. But what was the question?
Oh, yes, about the FBI file.
Oh, yes, so anybody. So what the FBI concluded is that I was just trying to make a profit. They even have a quote in there that says, from me, that says, the duty of a revolutionary is to make a profit. Kind of a parody of what Regis Debray said. The duty of a revolutionary is not to get caught. I never, by the time the Yippies came, what we had intended was all over. We believed that if you behave as if the revolution is won, the revolution is won. If you want to smoke pot, smoke pot. If you want to have sex, have sex. Then came a breed of people who would protest and say, legalize marijuana. Stop sexual repression, as if someone could give them permission, you know. The government isn't a father figure. People have individual responsibility. We never thought that we needed permission. And if everybody thought that they didn't need permission, then there wouldn't be oppression.
That is great. I mean, that's a great idea.
Then came the breed of people who would say, they'd have to have protests that would say, stop the war. Well, yeah, it would be nice if the war were stopped, but if you just don't go into the army, and then that's that, And if everybody did that, there wouldn't be a war. So, again, what was the question?
I don't remember it.
Oh, so the FBI's file concluded that I wasn't dangerous. And there were the comics were never embraced by the hyper-political people anyway, because it mocked them as well as it mocked their enemies. What? This means Summer Friend, right?
Which one is this? Oh. That actually exists?
This is Spiegelman.
Yeah. Really?
The other people, arts transcended his ego, but I didn't. I made these t-shirts. This one this is just badly printed. So this is the graphic poetry. This is in '66, before Underground Comics. This is Tyner from the MC5.
Oh,
Rob Tyner. What's this?
what magazine is this?
This is
Also, Chicago Music.
Well, the wood. Well, school. There's another bit of graphic poetry.
Sean Starks? Oh, yeah.
And here. What's to the D? To the what? To the D. That's all.
Oh.
After 2 hours.
I guess I could have pressed pause on this. But, yeah.
This copy is misprinted.
How so?
On both of these, the black ink is too heavy. You know, so like this stands for red, but no, the black ink
Oh, yeah.
is red. But this probably is. This is a long time ago, before they passed the civil rights.
Speaking of which,
This guy was a vicious biker. And now his daughter was in my comic book.
really?
She was like 2 when
Speaking of the civil rights movement, do you take an active part in that through your work and stuff?
I worked for Renewal magazine, which was put up by the Church Federation. This is like in 1966.
The Church Federation?
Yes, it was like Martin Luther King's. Now he would speak, and it would be recorded on Renewal, and then the press would pick it up from Renewal. So I worked for them for a while in '66.
See, was there some magazine Cheryl mentioned put out by Dick Gregory or something?
Well,
Or was that it?
the editor of Renewal was Jim McGraw, and he did a lot of work with Dick Gregory. I'll turn that off.
Ha 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 ha. Case this comes out now and then.
Yeah, it was the Community Renewal Society. They're still around. I don't know if they still publish the magazine. When I worked for Renewal in '66 or '67, and Sherman Skolnick exposed judges that were linked with the Casa Nostra, big scandal. If you go and look up that old issue of Renewal, I drew it, the spot cartoon on that page. They sent me to cover the conspiracy trial, and they wouldn't let me in. So instead I covered the arguing that the reporters did, the outrage that the guy from Newsweek felt because
all news had to be filtered through Channel 9 and the Tribune. These were the only members because they let into the courtroom in the early part of the trial, at the indictment. So I wrote about, instead of about the trial, about how upset everyone who wasn't allowed in was. But I don't think they ran that piece.
The conspiracy trial of what you spoke of?
Yeah, I was going to do like a court sketches and, report on what was going on, but they wouldn't let anybody in.
Speaking of conspiracy trials, I don't remember if you told me, were you friends with Abbie Hoffman, or did you know him, or from the neighborhood, or?
Yes, I did cartoons for the Realist magazine in the early 60s. Paul Kressner, the editor of the Realist, was one of the original yippies.
Yippies?
Yeah. This was a mutation of, it was politically involved hippies.
I see.
It came after hippies. I knew Krasner, so we, hung out a bit with Hoffman during the conspiracy thing. There was a Yippie reunion, a 20-year Yippie reunion, a 25-year reunion, whatever it was, a few years back. And, Carol and I gave him a ride to the hotel. Listen to what he had to say in the car.
What did he have to say?
Nothing. We were just talking about organizing and stuff like that.
So
now he's dead.
Okay, so this was in 62, you said, or 66?
This was in 67. The first thing we did was something called Wild. It was a ditto fanzine in 1960, late 1960, early 1961. So I would be 16. I read Crack magazine, and in the letter column of Crack, some kid wrote a letter that said he published something called Smudge. So I sent for Smudge, and in the back of Smudge, which was a little dittoed magazine printed in purple ink on a ditto machine, and they put out 80 copies of each issue, and it was a magazine about people who work in the satire magazines, like Mad, Sick, Crack, Help. So I sent for a copy of Smudge, and in the back of Smudge he also reviewed a bunch of amateur magazines put out by kids who were doing their own versions of Mad. And I sent for one of them, which was called Wild.
Who did that?
There's a guy named Don Doler in Baltimore, who was the publisher of it. But strangely, Art Spiegelman, Jay Kinney, Skip Williamson, a lot of people who later became underground cartoonists, we originally got in contact when we were like 14, 15, 16 years old, because as chance would have it, we all bought that issue of Crack, we all ordered Smudge, we all ordered Wild, and we all wound up doing cartoons for a while. The Crumb character, Fro Jr., was the mascot of Wild, the teenage magazine. This is Foo magazine. Crumb and his brother. This is from 1958. And this is Charles Crumb, Robert's brother. And this is the young Robert Crumb, who would have been 13 years old. And when Robert was 13, he's better than most, 50-year-old cartoonists are today. But our group kind of dismissed what Robert was doing because in Foo magazine, we were fans of Mad, and Foo has this heavy Disney association. So we just dismissed Robert as like some Disney boy. And it wasn't until 1963 when Robert started to do stuff for Help magazine, Harvey Kurtzman's magazine, that we saw positive social satire coming forth. If you look at early issues of Food, it's pretty conservative here. Here he mocks Nikita Khrushchev. So we did fanzines, and then when later when we were like 17 or 18, we did college humor magazines. But we concentrated on the college humor magazines that were the dangerous ones, that weren't associated with the college, that were published off campus, and that would break censorship restrictions. So I did stuff for Aardvark in Chicago, Charlatan magazine in Tallahassee, which was published by Bill Colleen, who was formerly the editor of the Texas, or no, he was an exchange editor of Texas Ranger at the point when Gilbert Shelton was the editor. Gilbert was, by this time, doing stuff for Help magazine, as all of us were. We were doing little cartoons for Harvey Kurtzman's magazine. And so this is how I got acquainted with Shelton, who comes not from fanzines, but from college humor magazines. But I guess another great catalyzing force was Help magazine. Some of us were already, the fanzines that we came from, we wrote in them about Help and Mad, and Kurtzman is the father of Mad. And when we wound up working for Help, there was another core of people that did stuff for the section of Help magazine called the Help Public Gallery in 1963 that later became the guys that started Underground Comics 4 years later. This would be Crumb and Shelton. Terry Gilliam was the assistant editor of Help. Gloria Steinem was the assistant editor at one point.
What is Gloria Steinem? I've heard that by...
She started Ms. magazine.
Oh, really? So you and Skip Williamson were doing Chicago Mirror and...
Yeah, I was in Chicago doing Aardvark, and Skip was in Canton, Missouri.
Oh.
Art Spiegelman was in Rego Park, New York. And Art came to Chicago and stayed with me in 1966, I guess, before there were hippies. And we hadn't taken LSD. But for some reason, in early 1966, we did a leaflet. And the leaflet had the dictionary definition of the word love cut out from the dictionary and a surreal drawing that Art and I did together as a jam that surrounded the word love. We thought that when you go out and somebody gives you a leaflet, it's either advertising a TV repair place or it's some political thing. So we thought if we did this surreal leaflet and gave it to people, this would be fun. So we instant printed it and we just went out on the street, and it was a way we could meet women as well. And we give it to all kinds of people and check their reactions. We give it to nuns. So this was a lot of fun. Then I did one more leaflet by myself that had a picture of a leaf on it. And then it was just a picture of a leaf. And then people would say, "What's this?" And I would say, "It's a leaflet." And that was fun. This was all before there was hippies and before the country went crazy. The country didn't go insane until 67. So meanwhile, Art went back to New York and got into this leaflet thing, and he did a lot of dozens of surreal leaflets and traveled around the country passing out these leaflets that people didn't know what to make of. The most famous would be later when Art's most famous one was "Play with yourselves and be your own food," which we printed in the first issue of the Chicago Mirror, but this was originally a leaflet. Then the hippie thing hit, and we decided to do the Chicago Mirror after having seen the East Village Other and the LA Free Press and things that were coming out like the Mirror. The Mirror was a satire magazine, and we did 3 issues, but we noticed that most people didn't get the satire part of it. They just wanted pretty pictures.
Mm-hmm.
There was another, The Seed was just starting, and it had not yet become political. And it was graphically very beautiful, but there was nothing in there to read. There was nothing clever.
I see.
So we decided to do a satire magazine for hippies, but it didn't really work because most of our readers were too stoned to follow it. And some of them didn't get it at all. Like, we ran one article about a lot of things were happening then, and some people would spread rumors about things you could smoke and it would get you high. Like if you smoke a rotten pepper, you would get high. Or if you ate Quaker puffed rice, and only Quaker puffed rice for a week, you would get high. Or if you smoked banana peels, you would get high. And most of these were myths. But by 1967, by the time the Mirror came out, we noticed that people that we knew talked constantly about getting high, and it was upsetting us. So we wrote something in here about that we told the, it's in the first issue, we told the people that they could actually smoke dog shit, and that the best dog shit was called Lincoln Park White. It was dispensed by Loving Peace Doggies. And, you know, we told them not to smoke the dog shit when it was brown. You gotta wait till it turns white. And it was obviously satire, you know. I can't find the article, but it was, you know, it was like the articles about bananas or about rotten peppers. Then I ran into a hippie. We used to print these things up and sell them on the street. And then I ran into a hippie on the street who bought the second issue, I think. And he told me that, yeah, that dog shit really works, man. Oh, here it is. So I guess it would work because it probably has a high nitrogen content. But this, you know, we thought this was obviously a satire magazine, but a lot of people read it as true things. It's like the Beavis and Butthead controversy. I was watching Jerry Springer, and they had the woman who, her kids burned down the house because they got the idea from Beavis and Butthead. So she says on the TV, I should order a transcript of this show, she says, well, I don't blame Beavis and Butthead. It's those writers that put those ideas into those boys' heads.
It's nice that she doesn't blame the characters.
How to do poop. Most common variety of poop in the Old Town area is Lincoln Park brown. It can be found laying on the ground amongst the trees and bushes of Lincoln Park, distributed throughout the park as a gesture of kindness by loving doggies. When poop turns white, it is virtually useless as a hallucinogen. And then there's all this stuff, you know. You take it, you cure it in a 300-degree oven. After baking it for 30 minutes at 300 degrees, the turd should be of a brittle consistency. It can then be crumbled and rolled into cigarette papers into 6 poop joints, a 12-hour trip for 2 poop freaks, or, as we call them, shitheads. A 17-year-old shithead told Mirror reporters the high is kind of like grooving on psilocybin, but more warm and human. To try to describe the poop pie in earthly terminology be with wasted effort. It's indescribable. All I could say was, while I was up there, was a wow. Well, you know, people actually believe this. So we figured at that point, you know, who is our audience, and what are we doing here? We're doing a satire magazine for hippies, and obviously they can't grasp this as satire. They rather look at beautiful designs. So then we just decided to do what it is that we wanted to do. And since the Mirror is essentially like a comic book, we figured, you know, why should we do this? We might as well just do a comic book. So instead of doing a fifth issue of, or a fourth issue of the Chicago Mirror, we published Bijou Funny #1. And another reason that we did was, we decided to do this was that Robert Crumb published Zap 1, and I was in touch with him at the time, and he sent me a copy. And within a few months, Shelton, who was also in touch with Crumb, but Shelton was living in Austin, Texas, published Feds and Heads #1. So Bijou is either the second or the third underground comic. First was Zap, followed almost immediately by Bijou, which was Skip and I, and Feds and Heads. But in the first issue of Bijou, there's work by me, from who did Zap, and Shelton, who did Feds and Heads. We were all in touch with each other at the time.
And then
there was a little lull where nobody would buy these books, and then all of a sudden it took off, and within 6 months there were 20 titles, and within a year there were 200 titles. Of course, we couldn't distribute these through regular magazine distributors because of the Good Comics Code. We didn't have the Comics Code seal. So we developed our own distribution system. There was a company called the Printnet at the time that was distributing psychedelic posters that would wholesale them rather than consign them. That's how they distributed Zap, ultimately, when Robert went to the Printnet to distribute Zap. Dennis Kitchen, after a while, had published Mom's Homemade Comics in Milwaukee, which he was distributing himself. And he was doing a pretty good job of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was developing a direct sales system, too. So maybe with the fourth issue of Bijou, we went with Kitchen rather than the Printnet to distribute our books. And Kitchen worked on the model of direct sales, of wholesaling the books, while all other books and magazines at that time were sold on consignment, which meant that the publisher would take a risk. He put them out there, and if they sold, he'd get money. If they didn't, he wouldn't get money. He'd get the coverage returned to him. So what happened here is, because of underground comics, because we couldn't get distribution, because we didn't have a code seal, we had to develop our own distribution system. And that distribution system has evolved into the direct sales distribution system. Years later, when Mike Gold started First Comics, he started to do direct sales to comic shops. And now, I believe 70% of all Marvel books are sold through direct sales. There would probably be no comic industry today if it wasn't for direct sales. And the concept of distribution through direct sales comes from underground comics. So, Todd McFarlane owes us. He'd probably be a bum in a gutter, drunk as a goose, if we hadn't done this. But,
Okay. So then,
but aside from the business part of it, at this time in history, you could not print certain words. You could not print the word fuck. When Terry Southern would write a novel, or when Norman Mailer wrote The Naked and the Dead, he would use fug instead of fuck.
for what?
A book called The Naked and the Dead, 1958. No one had ever printed this word. They would print F dash 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 in a book, But a magazine or a periodical wouldn't even dare do that. Some books that even, though they wouldn't print the words, they would get, like James Joyce's Ulysses, wasn't allowed to be distributed in the United States. It's a great book. Nabokov, Lolita, was illegal here for many years in certain communities. So we decided to just go overboard and say whatever it was that we wanted to say. Paul Krasner had been saying fuck since 1968 in the Realists. 1958, but he was the only guy. So we decided to, print what we wanted to print and not worry about it. And ultimately, at that time, in 1967, all of the underground papers did that. And as a result, we now have it to the point where you can say these words on television, on cable, even Channel 11. I guess we thought what we were doing was making the world safe for Henry Miller and Nabokov, but in the process we got like Larry Flint, but that's okay.
So did you ever feel any backlash from speaking freely? I mean, did you get in trouble?
I'd often get, I don't like to talk about this because I'd often get threatening letters, but I'd print them in a magazine. There's one here. Oh, even before the first issue came out. Apparently there would be no letter column in number 1. No, I guess in number 3 there's a hate letter. Yeah, when we'd sell the things on the street in those days, we would often get stopped by the police, and they would quote an ordinance, which I would then go to look up, and it turned out, in America the press is free. You can print a magazine and sell it on the street without a license. This is what this country is all about. But we nevertheless keep getting stopped and told to cease, and we were quoted a certain ordinance, which I went and looked up, and it was a fresh fruit and produce ordinance. And in the process, I found a law that was on the books in Chicago at the time. It was an ugliness law. It's a law against being ugly. And we just printed, I guess it's not here, we just printed the law word for word. It was a law against extreme ugliness.
What did it say?
It said you would be arrested if you walked the public ways if you were too ugly. And so we just printed the law word for word, and next to it we printed a photo of Mayor Daley. And then Playboy picked it up and printed the law in Playboy, and ultimately they took the law off the books. It's like a ridiculous law from, 100 years ago.
So then, underground comics boomed.
We made this town safe for the ugly to walk the streets. Yeah, underground comics boomed, and there was a lot of crap, but there were still people that would collect everything that was done. So anything that was printed, anybody who did a comic, when it became a craze around late 1968, would get it printed as long as it was drawn in the right proportion.
It's kind of like the black and white boom of 1987-ish or something. Was that the time? Was it earlier?
Yeah, I guess. Oh. I kind of lost track of it when they stopped doing humor. Uh, well, you know, when there were only 3 books, or when there were only 20 books, we could sell 40,000 copies before we even printed the thing. By the time there were 200 books a year, a number of things happened. There was a paper shortage, so our production costs went up. There was a massive closing of all head shops. And in the early days of the comics, we never really profited from the comic shop market. We did direct sales to head shops.
Mm-hmm.
There were 10,000 head shops. There were only, at that time, 1,000 comic shops. But we could, when there were very few comics, sell 40,000 before it was printed. Later, it would take us a year to sell 20,000. Today, there's something like 2,000 titles a month. It would be, especially in the shop market, it would be almost impossible to sell this.
Mm-hmm.
The people that go to the shops want superheroes. People that went to the head shops were of both sexes. So, I mean, it would have been better if instead of evolving into something that's distributed through comic shops, it should have evolved to something that would be distributed in supermarkets. But it didn't. But it doesn't matter so much, because now you can... This stuff doesn't have to be underground anymore. Anything that's in here can be on television.
Mm-hmm.
It's really tame. I mean, Lenny Bruce was getting arrested. He got arrested at the Gate of Horn in 1964 for a monologue in which he used the word cocksucker. Today, college, high school drama productions of Tennessee Williams used that word, you know.
Take you back from
Old magazine in the 40s. I mean, we're old. The guy who wrote G8 and his Battle Aces, where the Pulps put out this fanzine, and he was old. We were in it when we were young. I guess he would just sit in front of a wire recorder and just talk. And just say, you know, just talk, and then someone would transcribe it. And that would be like 3 issues of his pulp magazine. Yeah, so we used to get 40,000 before we were printed. So there's like two ways to do comics. There's like you can do something that puts forth a positive social message and not get paid anything. Or you can do something and get paid a lot. So when we were kids, we figured we had miserable lives. We could either be cartoonists or prize fighters. In the old-fashioned sense of prize fighters, it would be, you know, there would be a hall, and there would be 2 guys, and people would pay admission, and they'd take half the admission, and that would be the amount of money that the guy who knocks the other guy out gets. And then the other guy gets nothing, and that's it. It's simple. Today, it's not like that. Each guy gets a couple million, and it's on TV. But we could either be cartoonists or prize fighters. We would do that. We would fight, or we could draw comics, because in the, like, you know, Captain Marvel, when it was at its peak, before there was television, it sold 8 million copies every 2 weeks, which is unbelievable now. The guy who did Captain Marvel, C.C. Beck, got paid as much as, say, Fred McMurray got, you know, or any movie star at the time. Today, because it's in the shops, there's like a narrow casting kind of thing. Instead of publishing a comic, one title that'll sell 1 million copies, for which the artist will be paid a good amount of money, a company will just as soon publish 20 comics with 50,000 circulation instead of 1 book with 1 million, because artists are working for very cheap. I mean, some guys doing underground comics are getting like $1,500 for a whole book. But, you know, the food that you got to eat and the rent that you got to pay and the gas that heats you is more than that. So, as a result, what seems to have happened in the underground comics is it's limited the creators to upper class that doesn't need their money, and they become very self-indulgent in their personal fantasies, but the publishers can't complain because they're not paying them. I don't know. Yeah, but I like Hamster Man, though. This is funny. I laugh at Hamster Man. It's humor.
Well, you certainly don't appear to be in the upper class, so how do you...
Well, I don't do comics.
Oh, okay, there you go.
I'm kind of priced out of comic books.
So what do you do?
I do mostly licensed character stuff. I do these sticker albums that you get at the 7-Eleven, and The Simpsons, or The Little Mermaid, and Ninja Turtles. And for this, I do one sticker album. I get paid what I would get paid if I did 5 comic books. It is not creatively fulfilling, but I get money. I will do a thing for Raw. This will give me creative fulfillment.
Are you doing one? An upcoming?
I'm doing a jam thing.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, what do you think about Chicago?
Chicago is a good place because it's the barometer. It's like an average of the country. If you go to New York, people are insane in a depressed mode. If you go to Los Angeles, the insanity reflects a laid-back mode. But in Chicago, it's like an average thing, you know. In Chicago, you see a guy walking down the street, and elderly people sitting on their stoop look at him and say, "Why is this man not working?" Well, I was in New Jersey when I was a kid, and then we moved to Miami. I came here in 1963. I lived in the Diversity Arms Hotel at the time. Here's an amusing object that I found. This was 1964. I was still in the Diversity Arms Hotel. This is a letter from Lenny Bruce. And the letter was about some obscenity bust or something. And this was at a time when we had that battle to fight. And that's, you know, the comics, the early comics, or the early satire magazines that we did were for, you know, social betterment. There's a lot of books out today, a lot of comic books that the moral of the comic, or the reason for its existence, is that the cartoonist would like to be famous. But it doesn't say anything for the betterment of the world. But there's no dough in saying stuff for the betterment of the world, but you know, maybe there is. You know, Playboy, I've done a lot of stuff for Playboy over the years. And the books that we published and the risks that we took made it possible for Playboy to print controversial ideas cloaked in 4-letter words.
big, in that interview, he talked about the Playboy that was taken off the stands in Chicago about between Mansfield.
1963. Yeah, they would go after Playboy in the early days, not so much because it had nudity, but because it had, they would use the nudity as a reason, just like with Lenny Bruce. They would use the four-letter words as a reason to arrest him, because the content of what he was saying was critical of, say, the Daley administration. Or with Playboy, they were arrested for running a nude pictorial on Jane Mansfield, but in fact that same issue had an editorial about, criticizing Mayor Daley. So like one would be used, it's like I think they arrested some gangster in the 30s. They couldn't get anything on him, but they finally arrested him for throwing away a package of cigarettes without tearing the tax stamp, because it was a law that there used to be a federal tax stamp on the top, and after you consumed the cigarettes, you were supposed to destroy the stamp. Well, nobody actually did, but if they needed something on, that's what it was.
So, you also teach at the Discovery Center?
Yes.
The world famous whitewater rafting catalog.
Yes, I teach whitewater. I teach a class in cartooning at the Discovery Center, and it's a 5-week course.
Teach it in, what do you teach?
What do I teach?
Yes.
Well, it's only 5 weeks, so it's pretty condensed, but I do teach, like, methods for writing jokes. If you have to think of a gag, if you do a daily comic or a weekly comic and you have a deadline, you got to come up with a joke every day or every week, even if your dog gets run over by a truck. So I teach methods that start you thinking and writing jokes. One is the switch, where you take a cliché situation and reverse the elements of it. An example would be, there was a cartoon in the New Yorker a couple months ago of a man and a woman lying on a hilltop looking up at the clouds. And one cloud, in a dialogue balloon, says to the other cloud, the one on the left looks kind of like a battleship to me. Or there was a Howard Shoemaker cartoon of an alligator wearing a Lacoste shirt with a picture of a golfer on it. And once you have the subject, that seems to work 1 out of 6 every time. 1 out of 6 times, just reversing the elements of it. So this is probably the most important thing that I teach, but also other things about, drawing.
And like, what other things have you been involved in Chicago? Like, I don't have a particular. Well, I mean, and you mentioned the leafleting and any other interesting
things that we did for fun. Well, I watched the way that the Rocco Comics boys behave at the comic convention, dropping a stuffed effigy of Bozo from the 10th story and stuff. And when we were doing the college humor magazines, we used to do a lot of things like that. We used to visit the homes of conservatives and hit them with pies that were filled with hair. But that's we had the legal right to do that because the Charlatan magazine was very popular, and these people felt it an honor to be hit with a hair pie. There was a lot of that. I think when Shelton stayed in Tallahassee or something, once he moved and flooded his house, and there were a lot of people, with inner tubes swimming around the living room and stuff. He just had some discrepancy with the landlord.